My mother's illness came swiftly, mercilessly. A sudden diagnosis, a rapid decline. It was a brutal time, watching her fade, the vibrant woman who had been my world slowly consumed by disease. In her final days, she became frail, almost childlike. Her mind wandered, her words slurring. I was by her bedside, holding her hand, my heart breaking with every shallow breath she took. Robert was there too, his face a mask of grief, his hand tightly clutching hers. Lily and Tom were huddled together, weeping quietly. The air was thick with the scent of antiseptic and unspoken goodbyes. In one of her last moments of lucidity, her eyes, clouded with pain and exhaustion, found mine. Her grip on my hand tightened. She looked at me, a profound sadness in her gaze, a desperate urgency in her eyes. Her lips parted, and she whispered, her voice barely audible, a ragged breath, "Robert, you're real, Dad." My breath hitched. My blood ran cold. The monitors beside her bed flatlined. Her grip loosened. She was gone. But her words. "Robert, you're real, Dad." The world went silent, then exploded into a million shattering pieces. It was like a sudden, brutal awakening, a blinding flash of lightning that illuminated the darkest corners of my life. The distant memories of a different father, the old photo album, Mom's secretive nature, Robert's subtle distance, the shared features everyone commented on, the persistent nagging feeling, it all slammed into me at once, a tidal wave of sickening clarity. My stepfather. My biological father. All along. And my mother. She took the secret to her grave. The emotional chaos was instant, overwhelming. Heartbreak for my mom, profound and raw, tinged with a devastating sense of betrayal. Anger, a hot, venomous rage at the lie she had perpetuated, the truth she had withheld for decades. Shame, for being so blind, so naive, so utterly fooled. And silence. A deafening, echoing silence in that sterile hospital room, a silence that magnified the screams in my head. My life, my identity, everything I thought I knew about myself and my family, shattered in that single, whispered confession. Robert wasn't just my adoptive father, he was my biological father. And my mom had lived a lie, building our family on a foundation of deceit. The man she told me had abandoned me, the John from her past, was a phantom, a story she created to cover her tracks. I looked at Robert, sitting beside the bed, weeping silently. He looked up, his eyes meeting mine, filled with grief. But now, I saw something else there, a flicker of guilt, a deep-seated sadness that went beyond his loss of Eleanor. He knew. He had always known. He had been complicit in this lie. My entire existence had been a secret. And that's when I realized, they never loved me the way I loved them. What came after was a raw, visceral struggle for survival. I didn't want revenge that would burn everything down, I wanted truth, understanding, and a chance to reclaim my identity. I needed peace, and peace wouldn't come from silence or passive acceptance. The funeral was a blur. I moved through it like a ghost, a hollow shell. Every condolence, every comforting hand on my shoulder, felt like a mockery. My mother, revered and mourned, had taken a monumental secret to her grave, leaving me adrift in a sea of questions. Robert, my stepdad, my real dad, stood by her casket, his grief mirroring mine, but now, his sorrow felt laden with the weight of a shared lie. After the funeral, when the last mourners had left, I found Robert alone in the living room, staring blankly at the wall. The house, usually bustling with life, was silent, heavy with unspoken truths. I walked up to him, my heart hammering against my ribs, but my voice was steady, cold. "Mom's last words," I began, cutting straight to the heart of it. She said, "Robert, you're real, Dad." What did she mean, Robert? He flinched, visibly recoiling as if I had struck him. His face, already pale with grief, drained of all color. He looked away, then back at me, his eyes filled with a desperate, trapped animal's fear. She was delirious, he stammered, his voice weak. The medication, she didn't know what she was saying. "Don't lie to me," I said, my voice rising, an edge of steel I didn't know I possessed. "Not anymore. I saw that old photo album when I was a kid. I know the man you adopted me from was named John." But the way she said it, the way you look at me, the way you always looked at her when the past came up. "Tell me the truth, Robert. Were you my biological father?" His composure finally crumbled. He collapsed onto the couch, covering his face with his hands, his body shaking with silent sobs. The confession, when it came, was a broken, halting torrent of explanations, regrets, and desperate pleas. He told me about their past, before he and Mom were married. They had a brief, passionate affair when they were young, before Mom met John, the man she would later claim was my biological father. Mom got pregnant, but they were both young, scared, and unsure of their future. Mom then met John, a charming drifter, and in a moment of panic and confusion, convinced him that he was the father. She disappeared with John, only to reappear years later, after he had abandoned her. She was a single mother, struggling. Robert, heartbroken by their separation but still deeply in love with Eleanor, stepped back into her life. He saw me, a toddler, and his heart clenched. He knew, instantly, I was his daughter. He couldn't deny the striking resemblance, the quiet understanding that passed between us. He loved Eleanor, and he wanted to be a father to me. But Eleanor, terrified of the truth, of the scandal, of shattering the carefully constructed facade of her life, begged him to keep it a secret. She wanted a fresh start, a clean slate. She wanted him to adopt me, legally, so no one would ever question. She wanted to erase John, and their brief, chaotic history. He loved her so much, he said, that he agreed. He sacrificed his right to be my biological father, to acknowledge me fully, to give me the full truth of my parentage. He adopted me, loved me, raised me as his own, all while carrying the immense burden of a lie that defined our family. He had allowed her to create the narrative of John, the absent father, the man who abandoned us. He had allowed her to erase his own true paternity from my life. He promised Eleanor he would take the secret to his grave. But her dying words had exposed it. "I loved her, son," he choked out, his voice raw with grief and regret. "I loved you both so much. I just wanted to protect you, to protect her. I'm so sorry. I should have told you." The realization hit me with a fresh wave of agony. My entire life, a carefully constructed illusion. My mom, the woman I thought knew me best, had lied to me, to protect herself, to protect her image. And Robert, my stepdad, had been my biological father all along, silently carrying the weight of that unspoken truth, denied the chance to truly be my dad without the veil of secrecy. My identity, a fragile thing, shattered. My revenge wasn't about vindictiveness, it was about justice and reclamation. It was about bringing truth to light, not just for myself, but for Robert, who had lived a half-life of fatherhood. I decided to pursue a legal change to my birth certificate, to have Robert listed as my biological father. It was a painstaking, emotionally draining process, requiring DNA tests, affidavits, and a public acknowledgement of the truth. It was a formal annulment of the lie my mother had perpetuated. My childhood was complicated. My mom, Eleanor, was a whirlwind of contradictions. Beautiful and vibrant, but also fiercely private, almost secretive about her past. My dad, Robert, was a quiet, steady presence, a man of routine, kind but distant. He was a good provider, always there, but our relationship felt formal, lacking the easy intimacy I saw between other fathers and their children. He was, to me, Dad. He just was. My mom and Robert met when I was 4 years old. I have vague, hazy memories of a time before him, a different, smaller apartment, a younger, sadder version of my mom. She always told me my biological father, John, was a charming but unreliable man who had left before I was born, a fleeting presence who never wanted to be a dad. Robert came into our lives as a savior, a stable force, and shortly after, they married. He adopted me, legally, giving me his last name, making me officially a part of his family. He was my dad. End of story. Or so I believed. Our family unit was unconventional. My mom and Robert had 2 more children, my half-siblings, Lily and Tom. They were boisterous, outgoing, and effortlessly close to Robert. With them, he was different, a little more playful, a little more engaged. With me, there was always a subtle barrier, an unspoken formality. I attributed it to being an only child for my first few years, to being different somehow. I was always the quiet, observant one, watching the dynamics, trying to understand my place. My mom, Eleanor, was the linchpin. She adored Robert, and their marriage seemed built on deep affection and shared understanding. But she also had a nervous energy about her, especially when topics of the past came up. She would quickly change the subject if anyone mentioned her life before Robert, or if I ever asked too many questions about my biological father. "It's ancient history, darling," she'd say, a forced lightness in her voice. "Robert is your father. That's all that matters." Her eyes, though, would always flit towards Robert, a quick, almost imperceptible glance, as if seeking reassurance. I remember one particular afternoon when I was about 12. I found an old photo album tucked away in the back of a closet. It was filled with pictures from before Robert. There were photos of my mom, looking much younger, alongside a man I didn't recognize. He was handsome, with dark, piercing eyes and a kind smile. In one picture, my mom was cradling me as a baby, and this man had his arm around both of them, a look of immense tenderness on his face. He looked familiar, somehow. When I showed it to my mom, she snatched it from my hands, her face paling. "Just an old friend, sweetheart," she'd said, her voice sharp. "Don't go digging through old things." She tucked the album away, out of my reach. I didn't realize then that this was a red flag, a quiet signal of a much deeper secret. Over the years, the cracks grew. My mom's secrecy about her past intensified. She'd get agitated if I asked too many questions about John, my supposed biological father. Her answers were vague, almost rehearsed. "He wasn't a good man," she'd say, "he abandoned us." And that would be the end of it. Yet, sometimes, I'd catch her staring at me, a strange, wistful expression on her face, almost as if she was seeing someone else. And Robert, his distance, while subtle, was always there. He was a loving father to Lily and Tom, but with me, it felt different. A little less spontaneous affection, a little more guarded conversation. When I'd bring up a problem, he'd offer logical solutions, but rarely the emotional comfort I yearned for. I always felt like I was trying to earn his affection, to prove myself worthy of his love, unlike Lily and Tom, who seemed to receive it effortlessly. I attributed it to my overthinking, to being the different child, the adopted one. I didn't realize then that these were not just cracks, but gaping chasms ready to swallow me whole. The biggest crack, though, was a persistent, nagging feeling deep inside me. A feeling that something about my story, about my origins, didn't quite add up. I looked like Robert, more than I looked like my mom. We shared the same nose, the same determined set of the jaw, even the same peculiar way of crossing our arms. People would comment on it, casually, "Oh, you're definitely your father's daughter." Mom would always laugh a little too loudly, or change the subject. Robert would just offer a small, tight smile. The unease grew, a silent alarm bell ringing in the back of my mind. My half-siblings, Lily and Tom, were shocked, then confused. They struggled to process the revelation, their own sense of family shaken. It was a difficult conversation, filled with tears and explanations. But unlike my mother's secret, I offered them transparency, answering their questions honestly, allowing them to process it in their own time. It strained our relationship initially, but eventually, it led to a deeper, more authentic connection. Robert, for the first time, seemed to breathe a sigh of relief. The truth, though painful, was liberating. He stood by me through the legal process, openly acknowledging his paternity, finally able to fully embrace his role as my biological father. The distance between us, a lifetime of unspoken truths, slowly began to dissolve, replaced by a tentative, then growing, intimacy. We talked for hours, revisiting old memories, now seen through the lens of this new, shared truth. I learned about his quiet pain, his sacrifices, his love for me that had always been there, just hidden beneath the surface of a complex secret. I didn't want revenge. I needed peace. And that peace began to bloom when I accepted that my story wasn't about her betrayal, but about my journey to truth. It was about finding my authentic self, about reclaiming my identity, about forging a new, honest relationship with my father. It was about understanding that love, even when flawed and complicated, can endure. My mother, in her dying breath, had given me the greatest gift, the truth, however painful. It was her final, conflicted act of love, allowing me to finally connect with my true father.